Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkin, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber Larkin, your host, and today I have with me Mr. John A. Brink. John is a war veteran that came from Nazi-occupied Holland. He was in the Second World War, and he has an amazing story of the hardship that both him and his siblings have undergone, has some amazing insights, and he is going to share those with us today. So, John, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Amber. Nice to be on your show.
And you have your own podcast as well. What is your podcast about?
It's our podcast is On the Brink, and it goes to a wide variety of issues from anything that you can imagine around the world. So I've done about 175 podcasts, and we do about 13 to 15 a month, and then we are guests probably on another 4. And the topics go all across the board, from business to trauma, like yours is, to all kinds of other things, ADHD, entrepreneurship, and all issues. I had a good podcast on Friday with a fella that has focused his life on wildlife. You will like this, wildlife photography. Amazing artist. That podcast was done, I think, on Thursday. It came out actually yesterday. We had released it.
Nice.
Amazing photographs. So whatever is of interest to people that approach us, or we approach them, so that's what we do right across the board.
And you've been very successful, even given the hardship, which we'll get into. And then you're also an author, which you sent me some awesome books that I haven't had a chance to get into yet. But Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream is one of the books. The ADHD Unlocked, and Against All Odds, which is here. So if you look on the video, you can see these. But tell us a little bit about your books.
So the first one that I wrote, and I have to tell you a little bit of background, if you don't mind, to put some base around it. So I was born November the 4th, 1940, in northeastern Holland. Holland was invaded by the German armies in a blitzkrieg in April of 1940. My dad was drafted into the Dutch army, and the last time that anybody saw him was in the bombing of Rotterdam that killed thousands of people. Then for 5 years, they would not know if he had survived or if he was dead or alive. My mom I obviously was born in November the 1st, 1940, which tomorrow is my 83rd birthday. And I had a sister 1 year older and a brother 2 years older. And so it was a tough go, and we talk about that a little bit more later. But, so the Canadian Army liberated us on April the 12th, 1945. It made such an impression on me that I knew from that point forward I would go to Canada, the land of my heroes. And also during that period, no surprise to anybody, is that it got pretty rough during the war years. Hunger was commonplace, cold was commonplace, and anxiety, planes overhead, and obviously left me with PTSD, the inner child. I got counseling for actually when I was well into my 50s, and we saw far too many things that we should not have seen, and but then finally, I emigrated to Canada when I was 24. And the other point that I should add to it, as you wondered about the second book, ADHD, is that I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said, "What are you going to do with this guy? Should we send him to the mentally challenged school or do we get him a job?" Fortunately, my parents were beautiful people. They got me a job to train as a furniture maker. I would find out much, much later, actually, when I was 1997, when I was virtually 57 years old, when I walked into a store here in Prince George and I saw a book and I opened the book. I still don't know why. As I opened the book, the title of the book was Driven to Distraction. And it was about ADHD. And I said, "Oh my God, that's me." And so I bought a copy of the book and I wrote in it in Dutch. Now I finally know who I am because I was ashamed of it. Already I was starting to build a business and the business got bigger and bigger and bigger. And everybody would say to me, coming back to my first book, Esther, you got to write a book about all of this. And so for 20 years, I tried to write the book, started with it, stopped with it, started with it, stopped with it, on and on and on until about 5 years ago, I said, if I don't do it now, it will never happen. So I wrote the book against all odds. And, the autobiography, and as we all well know, is that writing books is not easy. And so, and if you write an autobiography, you better do it right the first time because you cannot kind of throw it away and say, I'll do it all over again. So it took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And the book has become very, very successful, actually, on all major media. It is in audio as well. And that was followed by another book that I wrote then about 3 years ago. And that was about ADHD Unlocked. And the more I found out about ADHD, the more I found that the frequency of occurrence, according to most people, was about 8% of the population. I believe it is much more than 20%. And so I felt I had an obligation to talk about it more, which I did, and then to write about it. So the book that I wrote is ADHD Unlocked. It's not only for people that have ADHD, but also what I say for people that are exposed to trauma, and that as a result will be slow learners or do not usually do well in the traditional learning environments. And then, because the frequency of occurrence is so large, I say it is virtually in anybody's life, you will encounter ADHD or slow learning in some form or fashion because of trauma or other issues. And so I recommend that people that read this, are the ones ADHD unlocked, but also people affected by trauma, or for people in a general sense that you will encounter people like that, ADHD in particular, that in your direct circle, your friends or the working environment, and it will. ADHD people tend to be a little bit different, and it will help you to understand them.
So, very, very interesting way that you have taken this trauma that you've undergone as a youth and grew up in, really, and you've transformed it into something amazing because you're doing so much to help people. So, I want to get into and maybe have you expand a little bit more on what that was like as a kid, like growing up in those kinds of conditions in World War II. What must that have been like?
Yeah, especially now, Amber, where around the world we have wars, maybe the Ukraine or Israel and other areas where currently people are exposed to war. And the first thing that I always say, Remembrance Day is on November the 11th. And what I usually do and have done for the last 10 to 12, 13 years, I usually speak at different schools in our area here in northern British Columbia, where we live in Prince George, northern British Columbia, but throughout the province of British Columbia and on the internet about the experiences of being exposed to war and all the other bad things that are surrounding it. And so I'd usually make a point to speak to at least 4 different schools because I believe I have an obligation to talk about it in terms of what the experience was, but also why 2 minutes of silence? What does it really mean? And so I usually have already 4 or 5 years lined up ahead that, it's quite popular. I'm also a professional speaker. And to do that, and I believe I have an obligation in doing that. So coming back to your question, what was it like? It's again remembering that I was not even born when the war started, and we were a young family, but it was just my mom and 3 kids, so it was difficult for them. And then what I remember from probably the time that I was 3.5, 4 years old is that at the time that the Allied forces were bombing Germany to end the war, they would fly in the areas where we lived in Northern Holland to, if they came from England, to be over water to avoid flak from the ground. And so we would have virtually on a daily basis, we would have hundreds of planes in the air. The sound of that alone is something I, as a little kid, still remember, and there is nothing like it, and likely we'll ever see again, I hope. So the other part that I remember is that there was always a sense of anxiety by my mother in particular. There were very other people around, but everybody had their own issues, meaning survival. And so you were pretty much on your own if you had to try to stay alive with a young, small family. So there was always a sense of anxiety, and some that people will understand is that if even for young kids and 3, 4 years old or even younger than that, if their primary caregiver, if there is anxiety in the air, they will feel that and that will stay with them. And so it always did with me in a sense. And then the other part is that when we were the toughest time was what we call the hunger winter of 1944-45, when the Germans had stopped having food delivered to big parts of Holland. And at the same time, there was hunger. And, so we would, as kids, go with gunny bags every morning to the railroad yards, find anything that was edible or eatable and burnable. So so I still, from that point forward, still remember hunger. Even now, I can still feel it in my body, the feeling of hunger. And the same cold. It was the coldest winter on record was 1944-45. A lot of, especially vulnerable young kids and older people died during that period. And then the actual liberation when the Canadians came in, and that created a sense of no man's land where the Germans that were fleeing on their way to the border. We were about 20 minutes from the German border. They had nothing left. And, they stole all the bikes that they could get and blew up the bridges behind them, but also were spooked easily by people. So I always remember several people being killed. They were laying on carts with legs and hands sticking out. And then I remember a neighbor, he was shot through his eye, came out of the other, and we saw that. And it kind of stays with you then. And, so it was a difficult time. And then, but other people don't always fully appreciate is that, that when the war is over, May 5th was the liberation in Holland, then, that there may be a thought by some of our listeners that, okay, the war is over, so everything is back to normal. No, it isn't. like families like ours, for instance. I don't think my dad had been gone for 5 years, and he was nearly killed a number of times. And so the relationship never got back to where it was at one time. And, and obviously PTSD followed. And then it takes a long time before things get back to, if you wish, a sense of normal. It could take a generation, sometimes longer. And that's the fear that I have now, looking at the Ukraine, looking at Israel, and all those other kind of places.
It's something that I think a lot of people can't really even wrap their minds around what that's even like, especially here in America. I don't think that we have experienced anything like quite like that to that extreme. We live in scary times, and it just because we've never experienced it doesn't mean that we can't ever. And I do think that it's something that we definitely need to stay attentive to because there's so many areas of the world where even now, like you said, the wars that's going on now, little kids are affected by this. So you were a kid when this happened, and you fled, and then later in life you become a soldier yourself.
Correct. Yeah, I was drafted by the Dutch Air Force
Mm-hmm.
and was in special forces for 30 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're nearly drafted into, we were on the verge of being sent to in the Dutch New Guinea, which was then overran by Indonesia. We were leaving the following week and didn't quite get there. But yeah, indeed, I was in the Dutch Air Force, and so in a warlike setting, it's sometimes, yeah.
Was this hard as far as having that trauma as a child and then moving into actually doing this for a profession? Was there triggers and things that popped back up after your experiences as an adult?
The interesting thing about that, Amber, is good question. Is that those feelings never leave you. It's always the anxiety that I then felt from my parent and the inner child. The inner child stayed with me until I was well into my 50s, and so was then all part of that emotion internally, and then the other part seeing far too much that you should not have seen, and then especially being trained in the warlike setting, especially being in special forces, and that it must have been something that and directly I did not relate it to it, but it still stays with me even now. That I'm still sensitive to it. So it did, but exactly it did. I'm not exactly sure, but I still have that feeling about the and maybe that's why it's so important to me to. There are not many people left that had experience in the Second World War. And for me, as a young person, it is important for me to share with other young people here that have been so fortunate, not directly having been exposed to a warlike setting, to share with them how fortunate we really are and how quickly things can change. So that's usually what I do. Why the silence? Why are we doing that? And what does it really mean? And what should it mean to even the young people that are my guests? And and a lot of times, the schools that I speak to have 700 students, and a lot of times, initially, there was a fear of saying, "Well, you have 700 students there; that they probably can't be quiet that long." You could hear a pin drop. They understand, and how fortunate we are. Overnight, everything can change. Everything around you can change. So all the things that we take for granted. That's why it is so important that be aware, and that at the same time we show compassion. For war is bad. Bad for everybody, and so. and extremely unfortunate, that these things happen. And, it does affect people. But for me, I still have an obligation directly relating to that period of having to talk about it, and in terms of making our young people aware of being appreciative of living where we are living, either in North America, really, with Canada
Mm-hmm.
and the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just being grateful about life in general. I mean, about everything that you can be grateful for. And I think sometimes as we grew up in cultures where we've never experienced anything like that, it's very easy to fall into this like complaining or things doesn't go my way. And
Taking it for granted, right? So,
mhm, yep, taking it for granted and then feeling like if things are not perfect, you're giving the go ahead to complain. And I feel like there's a shift that begins to happen in people when they can take that gratefulness and choose gratefulness over complaining.
yeah,
And I see that a lot in our culture, and it concerns me a lot. And I think that a lot of trauma comes from the mentality of exactly. So for those
that's
of
why.
you who are listening, yeah, he's
That's
holding
why
up, find your passion, live your dream.
and saying, and so when I came to Canada, I didn't feel that I had been successful because I left school when I was 14, and a lot of my friends went to college and on to university, and I became a laborer, and I admired it now, but then it was kind of looked down on, and and I was very good at what I was doing, and then very quickly already was quite successful in Holland. But then I felt I had to prove to me, not anybody else, that I was equal to all the other guys and girls that were successful and had gone to college and university, and but I wanted to find out if that were the case, so I left Holland in July of 1965, when I was 24 years old, with a suitcase, two sets of clothes, three books, and 150 Canadian dollars. I couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. And on my way I wanted to build a lumber mill. And so the place to go would have been British Columbia. And so I flew into Montreal, took the train across Canada. My God, that's a long way to go. I'll know from the States. And, so then when I arrived in Vancouver, Canada, I went to the immigration office. Fortunately, there was a German fellow there and I could speak some German. So I told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to build a lumber mill. He said, Prince George. Prince George is about 500 miles north of Vancouver. It is British Columbia is a beautiful province, and it's right in the middle of the province. From north to south, east to west, 500 miles is halfway. And, so I arrived here. Have you got my sign there? And I arrived here and I came off the bus. And, and as got off the bus, I had my suitcase, my two sets of clothes, the three books, and then I had in my pocket, and my employees gave me this. This is a sign. I had $25.47. But what I did have is attitude. The glass is always half full for me, and if it is a bad day today, I'll swear it's much much better tomorrow. Passion is that I love what I'm doing, and everything that I do, I give it 120%. And then work ethic. I work harder than anybody, and what will follow is success. And so my employees gave that to me. So, uh, so with the $25.47, I wanted to start from that point and build my career. So within a year and a half, I was the superintendent of one of the largest sawmills here. Within 2 years, I was part owner of a sawmill and owned a motel. And within 10 years, I built a company called Brink Forest Products, part of the Brink group of companies. And we have 10 companies. And all around British Columbia and employ normally around 400 people. And and then I'm obviously an author, and I feel much better about myself now in regards to my grade 7 failing because it was ADHD. And then the other part about ADHD is that for all those people that are, are are blessed with it, because I call it a superpower, and and so hence a lot of people say to me, "How can you do all these things? You're writing books, you podcast, and you're doing these companies and all the others." I say ADHD. That's why, and I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it too. And I think again, that's just one of the things that shows your personality and your determination, how you take something that is deemed as in culture as negative, like ADHD, and you said, this is who I am. I've embraced it and I've chose to use it for fuel, basically, which has helped you become very successful from where you came from to where you are today is super successful. I didn't get a chance to read the books, but I did thumb through there, and just looking at the images that you have in these books shows the amount of success that you've had. Can you talk to us a little bit about that success and what that was like, having come from such a dark place as a child to then growing into something that is not only successful. Success is defined differently by different people, but you're not only successful in the sense of you've grown these companies, but you're successful in the sense of you are now educating other people. You're pulling other people out of their own trauma, making people aware of these different types of trauma, making them more empathetic and loving and understanding of people that's been through trauma. So in my eyes, I consider that success. But can you talk a little bit about what that was like? Like what are your thoughts about that? At what point did you determine that I've kind of made this success a thing? I've turned my life around.
So, what became already very important to me is that I admired our liberators. Holland mainly was liberated, although the Allied forces liberated Europe. The Canadians, in particular, pushed through northern Holland and or most of Holland, and so I was so impressed by them that I always knew from that point forward that someday I would go to the lands of my heroes, and and I did that when I was 24 years old, and then the other part was the dream that I'm equal to everybody. It's not just my that I left school at the age of 14, but that I had abilities as well, and I had to prove that to myself, starting all new again in the land of my dreams was again very important to me. And and then obviously the forest industry is something that I was trained in as a furniture maker, and my dad managed a small lumber company, so I wanted to build my own company. So I did all of that, and I proved to myself, not to anybody else, that I could do it. Then, the obviously when I found that ADHD was something that I was big time ADHD, and the effect of that was an opening for me. And then, the building the companies, it's always difficult to get something off the ground. And a lot of people say to me, "How did you get it off the ground? How did you get it started?" So I like talking about entrepreneurship. I do give lots of presentations about that all over the place. And, so what is the most important and the most rewarding thing for me is I've been very, very involved in. I grew up in an area in the land of culture in Holland. That culture is giving back to the community. To me, has always been very, very important, and I've done that throughout my life. Even was that not all that much that I could do financially over the years. I've been able to do more, and That to me is very, very important. And then the companies are successful, but to me, making a lot of money has never been the priority to me. Success to me is building companies that contribute to society as a whole, and obviously are also successful financially. You know, but but being an inspiration to others to me has always been important, and hence the book Against All Odds is not about success, but it's from all the going through all the ups and downs. What made me successful with others at wouldn't likely is determination to keep going, never give up, and still, even today in the economy, there's probably in the last 50 years, it's nearly 50 years that I've been in business. This is probably the most difficult period that we have gone through collectively. I do a lot of business in North America. Amazingly to a lot of our friends in the United States of America, we watch you guys very, very closely. And so I'm very familiar with your political system and the business and the economics and all of that sort of thing. And, a lot of times what happens to me, Amber, if I fly over Canada and the United States as well, I look outside and I say, it's paradise. It is paradise. And I do a lot of flying. I'm also a pilot, but, a commercial flight. I usually sit by the window and I look outside and say, it's paradise. That's simply how lucky we are. And so mainly what has been important to me is, being part of the community, giving back to the community, and building successful business has never been the primary objective, being making a whole lot of money and God knows what else, but that's been the most rewarding to me.
You do a lot of on your podcast, you do speaking. Do you do coaching as well?
Yeah, I do coaching indirectly, by I may be a guest lecturer at a lot of the universities and at the colleges that ask me to speak to different topics, usually entrepreneurial related, business related, but also other topics. Yeah.
Mhm. So, what would be your top advice to give, say, someone who is entrepreneurial or aspiring to be an entrepreneur?
Very good question. So, I did, one of the last presentations I did about 6 months ago, I was on a panel and speaking about entrepreneurships and all the other things. And we had guests that are people there that wanted to ask the panelists and make submissions to them and look for feedback. And so this one fellow said that, he was an entrepreneur and he had some ideas and he wanted to start a business, and then he made a proposal to the bank and they turned him down. So in his opinion, the problem was the banks and the financial institutions. And I said, okay, but did you do then? But he said, it obviously doesn't work anymore. So I said, let me give you an example. When I started in 1975, I had no money and I put together a business plan that was fairly detailed, still works today, actually, amazingly, 50 years later. And I went to every single bank in our community, in our region, got turned down by every one of them, and ended up with two of them at the end. And I want to them not to hound them or be negative, but keep asking for what else can I do to improve my proposal. The problem was I lacked equity. I had a good proposal, I had the experience, but I did not have the equity, meaning money. I couldn't find any partners going into the business. So the one bank I went to probably 12 times, different times, make changes again. And then I always remembered like just today, it was in early 1975, January, February, March, whatever it was. I went into the bank and the manager of the bank was sitting about 6 cubicles away from where the fellow was sitting that looked at my proposal again. And I was looking for $25,000 to start my lumber company. And I still remember like just today, way in the distance, I hear Give him the money, give him the money. The point that I'm making is simply determination, never give up. And too many people give up too quickly. That would be one advice. The second one is that if you have ideas, bounce up by entrepreneurial people that have been successful. Most of them, you may think, well, they don't want to listen to me. That's not so, because most entrepreneurs that have gone through this love to help people that have ideas. And if you ask to go for a coffee with them or whatever, or to take a half an hour of their time, in most cases, I would suggest that will reward. Read their books. That's another one. Go to their presentations. I did that already when I was young. Before I came here, I would go to listen to people that made presentations, and the amazing thing about it was, and a lot of times it's continuity, but made them successful is all the same trademarks. They never give up, determination, persistence, and they stay the course. Now,
Mm.
the other part about it, I have to add, I became much more aware of it much later in life, after 1960, or when I was 60, is that a lot of the entrepreneurs that are successful in business, ADHD. It is. So where we now, we are applying, we have looking for new employees in our company, and especially on in one particular case, we are looking for production managers. So we have an advertisement going out all across Canada, maybe it's US as well. Is that we're looking for a production manager? We lay out the qualifications that we are looking for, and then we add to the bottom of it ADHD considered to be an asset. And
Mm.
the first time that anybody advertised that, virtually going across the world, and I mean that sincerely, is that, so I'm working on ADHD is a bonus, it's a benefit, it's not a liability.
Mm. So, when you're talking about ADHD in this sense, are you talking about someone who would be diagnosed with ADHD? Or I know you touched on earlier that ADHD is also what you would consider someone who has gone through trauma, or you would consider that book being purposeful for someone who's gone through trauma. Would you use those two things simultaneously, or are
Mm.
you speaking?
So let me say this, Amber, is that I'm not a medical doctor and I cannot give medical advice. I'm not trying to do that. That then coming to the points that I'm making is simply saying that a person that has ADHD is the benefit that I have. I have great capacity. I'm uh, usually excited about the things that I do, and I can do a lot of things all at the same time. But one of the challenges that I had when I was in the schools, a lot of times when I was there, I was not preoccupied by all the mundane things that I had no interest in. I believe the same could well happen to people that have been exposed to trauma. I'm not suggesting that they are ADHD, but simply because of the fact that they have been exposed to trauma, they would not be, as easily captured by sitting in the school for the next 4 years, listening to a whole lot of things that they will never use again.
Mhm.
And so, in my case, a lot of times mentally, I was really not even there. If somebody asked me, you sat in school this morning, do you remember what they talked about? I would say, no, I have no idea, no clue.
Mhm.
And what I'm suggesting is that that people that may have been exposed to trauma or something like that would likely be able to become more effective in their normal learning system if there was more thought given to the effects of trauma and learning.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Well, the reason I
but
asked
not
that,
I'm not a doc. So.
right, absolutely. The reason I ask that is because this was my next question for you, but I just got sparked in my mind with that. But my next question was with do you believe that hardship or trauma or things that we've been through in our life that we've overcome builds a certain characteristic of resiliency in people that they can't necessarily get through other means, except having to go through that hardship, building that type of resiliency.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I believe that is the case. Unless it is, you have to be able to somehow reconcile it in your mind. That doesn't mean you eliminate it, but that you can, that during the period where you're still trying to deal with it, it makes it difficult. But at some point in life, you have to be able to reconcile it in order to have a sense of, okay, I know it's there, but I can go beyond it. And I believe that is extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
But if I look back for myself, that I still have features that go back to that period. I always lock my doors. I'm always worried about things. I'm always trying to understand the environment that I'm in, and I still feel from time to time the hunger and cold somehow in a strange way. That soon as things get and I don't even have gloves and it gets 30 below here. I don't, but I still get the feeling of cold and then to a certain extent the anxiety and then the hunger and then trauma to a certain extent that seeing dead bodies and people being shot, and far too much of that always in a way stays with you. And that's likely one of the reasons that I feel I have the obligation to speak wherever the opportunity presents itself, and especially to young people, as to say, why do we have the 2 minutes of silence? Why is it so important to remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And, so, and that's why I do that, so, and, the, so the answer to your question is the trauma does stay with you. I believe it does, but do you reconcile it? That's the important part. And if you don't, like I got counseling for the inner child in my late 50s, very, very, very emotional, so, and then PTSD, I'm not exactly sure if you get past that in the sense that you can reconcile it, you become aware of it. I didn't fear it necessarily, but I know it's always kind of there in a way.
Mm, yeah. Wow. That's, you know, I think about these things a lot. I think everybody goes through trauma, but I definitely believe that some people's is worse. Of course, we live on perception as well, so it depends on how we perceive that trauma as well. But I don't know that hearing your story, I don't know how well we can relate. I do think it's very important for us to like get a good understanding of this, and to have empathy, because we do live in a time right now where things are happening in our world where I feel like a lot of times we want to just put it out of sight, out of mind. And it takes someone like you reminding us that these things are happening and that people, families are being really impacted on a huge scale.
Yeah.
So I think what you're
And people
doing is
are persons, right? It stays with them. The farming years a lot of times are in the first 5, 6, 7 years of their lives, and the environment that they are in, and the closeness and the importance of that protection of their parents
Mhm.
and loving environment, being always in a sense of anxiety because of bombs falling or planes overhead, where you pick up from the parent that anxiety that exists. My mother used to take us outside on the flat roof on the back of the house, not to look at the planes, but she felt safer outside than inside. And all we saw overhead is hundreds and hundreds of planes, 350, 400 planes on the way to Germany. And if you kind of mentally see Holland, northeastern Holland, is about 20 minutes from the border. We could see in the distance Bremen, Kiel, Hamburg, and all of those things in the distance being on fire. It's and planes coming back and shooting, and all of that sort of thing. The has an impact on you.
If you have someone, they have a lot of childhood trauma, what would be your best advice for that person?
Again, not being a qualified individual in a professional way, but in a personal way, find comfort with others in similar ways. And the second one is get professionals to help you work through that. So, not to forget, but that you can find a way to reconcile it in terms of your past and that you don't live with it on a day to day basis. And you find that in people that have been there and are there, and then getting the professional help to kind of help you work through that so that you can not forget about it, but still have it there, but get to, as close to a sense of normality as you can. And the more you can appreciate what's happening in life in a general way, how lucky we are in North America. And then, so the other thing that I did here is that coming from Europe is that the day of the invasion by the Russians of the Ukraine, the if you were at my mill here, you will see a couple of flags out here, one for BC, one for Canada. I said I need I said to my people here, get me a Ukrainian flag because I want to hang it up. And I couldn't find one and nowhere. And they said, well, it will take 2 weeks. I said, I don't have time to wait. So I went to a store here that sells uh, uh, the colors that I need, blue and yellow. So I got one made. We got about 4 or 5 made, and we hang them up the same day they invaded. So that was important to me.
Why so? To just make a point, having the
Yeah.
flags there? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
because I don't believe in war. Period. And I troubles me in a lot of times that what I see. I'm not being in judgment. This is not the place, the time to do that. But that the wars are destructive, and a lot of times, if I look around the world, I'm going to be so free to say that. If I look at North Korea, Kim, I look at Putin, I look at Iran, I look at other places like that. Hitler fits in that category, and where singular individuals have been able to drive countries into and others into devastation. And I say, why?
Mhm.
Why do we tolerate that? So so it's very, very troubling, and then a lot of innocent people, but in particular generations of young people will be affected by it for generations to come. Theirs as well as others that are trying to deal with that. Not only is the loss of life, but all the other things that have been destructive to the things that are so important to us.
So, what would be your advice for someone like myself who, obviously, I'm very empathetic. I have a lot of, I don't like seeing the things that's happening in our world, and I I do believe that you can make a difference by taking action. But in this regard, especially pertaining to war, how do you have any advice for what we do is just as a population, just as individuals, speak out, or is there other things that we can do?
I speak out in terms of that, the war is bad. There are never winners in wars. And, so I believe that, but I will say that all the time. I'm proactive in the sense that's why I'm podcasting. It's not solely for that purpose, but, I don't shy away from that. I'm very open about, my background growing up in war and getting that message out. And if I look around the world, we're lucky in North America. Not so sure that we always fully appreciate it, but we have a democratic system, where the dictatorships like North Korea, Russia, China, Iran, those kind of places, that are pure dictatorships, is not healthy. And, but at least so far we are very, very lucky. And in Canada, maybe a little bit different, not getting into politics here, but Canada is very boring because we have the premier, the president, or Trudeau, is could be thrown out of office, tomorrow for all intents and purposes, and then we elect somebody else. So it doesn't rise to the same level as it does in the states, where we have the Congress and the Senate, and then obviously the Supreme Court, and then the White House, and they could, that it becomes, to say the least, interesting. So we're watching with full interest as to what happens in November this year when the official re-elections take place, and in particular the elections in November of 2024, as to who will be the president of the United States, because it affects us all. And
Mm-hmm.
and I watch it very, very, very closely. And
Yeah,
so what I'm saying to you, so is Amber, is that be free, be willing to speak out about it. You know, not necessarily politics is always delicate, but at least in the general sense that that we are extremely lucky to what we have on both sides in North America, and wherever the opportunity presents itself, I'm fairly vocal about that.
I love what you're doing. I love that you're training up entrepreneurs. I believe that entrepreneurs have the power to really make a difference in the world because there's one, I think they're leaders. Obviously you have to have some leadership ability to run a business or to run a company. And so I think there's leadership ability. And I think that having that, I don't know the word you would use here, but almost like autonomy, or like you're not under any other system to where you have control of your money and you have control of your time and you have a voice. I I truly believe that entrepreneurship is powerful. And I think for someone like yourself who has gone through some of the worst trauma and has rose above, and now you're not only very successful in your businesses, but you're training up other entrepreneurs and you're making a big difference in your podcast and in your voice. And I think, when you told me that you're 80, was it 83? You told me you're 83 today?
Tomorrow, tomorrow,
Tomorrow.
80.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Which you don't look that age. So I think it's definitely, when you have purpose, it builds longevity to your life. I truly feel so. And you're I think, a living, walking example of that. So I just want to thank you so much. But before we close up, I just want to ask, is there any other like closing remarks or anything else that you'd like to leave our audience with?
I would say, Amber, and thank you for those kind remarks, is that I'm a businessman. That means that I have to sometimes, and a lot of times, I have to be hard and tough, but I always have respect. And I would say respect. The other thing that I would say is very, very important for others. And, and then the other part is that I respect anybody, no matter what their religion is, their sexual preferences, and all the other things. I will all respect them. And then, in a general sense, I say far too often people are critical of themselves and saying, this doesn't look good, that doesn't look good, or I'm not good enough, and say, don't. Uh, every individual is unique and special as to who they are.
Hmm. I agree. I agree with you 100%. And it's up to us to kind of find who we are so that we can use our gifts for what we're
Exactly.
put here for. John, thank you so much. You have been amazing. Thank you for going into detail about your story and just for having the courage to share that with so many people on your podcast and in your books. And I just thank you so much for you coming here today and sharing with us.
Thanks, Amber, and let's stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.